This audience that just cares about each other so much. All right.
What?
Koya's making trouble at the back.
Sorry. You should sit in the front, represent.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adrienne Contine, and I'm the curator of public practice here at the Queen's Museum. Before we get started, I'm going to begin with the land acknowledgements. The Queen's Museum would like to acknowledge the past, present, and future generations of the Tinicok, Lakawe, Oikawe, Munsee Lenape, and the interconnected Matawak communities across the greater Long Island region as stewards of the land. As both a museum of art and a historic site built on unceded Indigenous lands, Queen's Museum is committed to working towards a living land acknowledgement, built on listening, collaboration, and action together with Indigenous communities. We recognize the ongoing impacts of the violent colonial displacement of Native people, as well as the displacement of animal relatives and the disruption of natural ecosystems by the United States. We invite our communities to join us in taking action now by devoting time to taking care of the land, whether this be cleaning up your local park or donating to an Indigenous-led advocacy group. So I'm really thrilled to welcome you all to this program on the opening weekend of Tracey Rose, Shooting Down Babylon. Tracey Rose, Shooting Down Babylon is conceived and organized by Zaitz Mocha, by Koyo Kuo, who we're so lucky to have here today, the executive director and chief curator, as well as Tadazani Lakoma, who we're also so thrilled to have here today, the assistant curator, in collaboration with Tracey Rose. The presentation here at Queen's Museum is organized by Lauren Haynes, Director of Curatorial Affairs and Programs, with Sarah Cho, Assistant Curator. So, many congratulations to each of this entire team. Today's conversation will explore Rose's decades-long career with Christian Haye, a writer, poet, and critic who represented Rose as her first U.S. gallerist at the project, and independent curator, Tumelo Mosaka, all of whom we're tremendously honored to have here today. I had a little preview of the chemistry and brilliance. It's going to be a great conversation. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for coming. Hand it over to you all.
Are we ready? All right. Good morning, everybody. It's so beautiful to be here. And thank you, Queen's Museum and Tracey Rose and everybody in making this occasion and bringing this exhibition to New York City. Yeah, where to start? It's a really packed exhibition, and hopefully we'll be able to touch on a few ideas that are traced through Tracey's work. But I think maybe the best place to start is the title, Shooting Down Babylon. I'm kind of curious, Tracey, because I think, you know, what it resonates a lot with is obviously Bob Marley's Burning Down Babylon.
Say it.
Say it loud. There you go. That's the Tracey we know. So I was just curious, maybe if we started there in terms of thinking about, you know, what were some of the intentionality behind this title of Shooting Down Babylon?
So do you want to show? Should we show that the totem piece? Oh, you got it. Let's see. I think it's one towards the end. So the title of the exhibition takes its title from the artwork that's just around the corner in the window, entitled "Shooting Down Babylon." And that was, it's kind of like well, it's a totemic, it's a totem, which is kind of a tribute to Namjoon Pike, but also it documents the, okay, we can see it around the corner in the window. Installation, and the installation is kind of you know, splattered paint, wall paint, painted. It's a lot of fun. Reigniting my love for painting with it. But going back to the video was a documentation of an ayahuasca journey I did in South Africa. It was the last one I did. I used to kind of do them quite often. And I did it in Knysna Forest with this white South African shaman, which is a bit problematic, but he takes himself very seriously. We actually had a discussion about his claim on the land and all of that. Anyway, and the whole thing about anyway, so I was kind of looking at I don't even looking at it. It was more kind of a marker for a moment because that was the last time they were going to do they were going to do the ayahuasca journeys in this particular landscape. Simply because they just also became a lot, far too kind of corrupted by sort of pseudo shamans and all the rest. He was kind of more on the pretty legit side. Actually, he had a lot of respect for the medicine. And every time I'd like done these journeys, what was really strange was it was always Native American guides, spiritual guides that kind of came up. It was never African guides. That was just something, by the way, which I'm sort of processing here. But also, kind of going back to Shouting Down Babylon and Bob Marley and the Wailers, and I feel out of the two of them, out of him and Peter Tosh, were probably Bob was the less radical. Peter Tosh was the more radical. I think kind of the person was more sort of vocal and uncompromising about the socio-political status of Black people globally, and not wanting to neuter that or kind of water it down, romanticize it in a way. I felt like Bob Marley was a lot more accommodating. And kind of growing up, growing up in South Africa and how sort of censored information was, and how any kind of radical thinking and practice was essentially just nothing we were exposed to. But somehow reggae was allowed, and I don't know if it was just because the Afrikaner nationalist government didn't understand the language, but it kind of filtered through. So kind of growing up, and my cousin introduced me to reggae more, and they were more they were kind of more tuned to Peter Tosh than they were to Bob Marley. And this is like growing up in Sydney, this kind of sort of stereotypical kind of ghettoized townships and neighborhoods in South Africa, and how these boys who were just also essentially kind of on the route to either blue collar work or gangsterism or maybe teaching, were also kind of radicalized by this music, and by kind of having the status of being older, they influenced us who were much younger. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious and interested because this idea of radical practice, compromise and uncompromising. And I'm curious, especially since we have Christian Haye here, who was the first gallerist to show Tracey's work in New York. What was it that you saw in Tracey's work that attracted you, and what is it that drew you to thinking and including Tracey as one of your artists?
Can we hear me? Yeah. When at the time I first saw Tracey's work, I was writing for Freeze, and I was doing a piece on the, I believe the 7th Istanbul, but it was on the Istanbul, Johannesburg, and Gwangju Biennales. And Tracey's work, just, was such a, clear drink of water in a very muddy landscape. And in particular with Span 1 and Span 2. When you saw those works, to see, this is the first, I think they're the first and second. Do I go for it?
Yeah, those ones.
So, Span 1 was the first work I'd ever seen of Tracey's, and to get there at the Johannesburg Biennale and see former prisoners carving their diaries into the walls of the museum, I thought, it's so far and above anything anybody else was doing at that Biennale in terms of both its timeliness, its attention to what was actually happening, and And then the second piece that I saw was, of course, you know, her famous in the Victory statue. Move on to the second one. There we go. And also contemporary artists who were dealing with issues of sexuality, the body, femininity, and all these kinds of things. There was nobody else. There was literally nothing else that dealt with kind of these issues. And then when I found out that they were by the same artist, then that literally just blew my mind. And I had just been thinking about this and thinking about this. Even after I wrote the piece, I still these words kept on resonating with me, these two works. And I was at a dinner with Franklin and Franklin Sermons a couple of months later in New York, and I kept on, I found myself continuously referring back to these two works. And then I heard from the other side of the dinner table, oh, those are my work. And I had no idea that, she was there, and we have been inseparable ever since. And for someone who is so, consistently, radical in such ways as, not just as a performance artist or as an African artist, but just as an artist and as a human being who goes through life. And, just looking out, half of you I know have personal interaction with Tracey, and so just, you understand that there's not, only ever once in a while will you meet a mold breaker, will you meet somebody who you know will never be copied, who's never, who doesn't come from somebody else, who's just her own entity and cannot be repeated. And this is one of these people. And when you meet one of those people, you take special care. And what she's done to just inform me of what is possible as an artist, not as a African artist, not as a female artist, just as an artist, is something that I treasure to this day. Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that. I think I want to pick up on that a little bit because I think this, but before we move to the next slide, which I want to pick up on that, but I just want to also say that it's interesting that the work you've titled Span 1 and 2. Now, I think within a South African context, at least the way I read it, is not, the title of the work is Span. It's sort of an Afrikaans word meaning work. So it's a very different kind of interpretation to span. And so when you look at the work within a South African context and span, you have somebody, prisoner sitting with his back to the audience, writing on the wall. There's this almost invisible presence of this body in the space. And then within span 2, you have, again, the body not engaging the audience, sitting, facing, or at least showing the profile of the body, and yet also engaged in some kind of labor. So I think both those pieces really, at least in my reading at the time, and maybe even now, is a very interesting, I think I'm still processing it even after all these years I've seen this work. But I think, to your point in terms of thinking about how, these words were very different at that moment in terms of how the black body was being configured and understood, especially in a way that was not being exoticized, but rather finding a way of destabilizing this exotic representation of the black body. And so, yes, I just wanted to make that connection in terms of understanding the meaning and how Tracey, using, very subtle movements in terms of how she was positioning the work and what it suggested at the time.
But also, all of our works, you'll see some things that certainly are not subtle within this show, and but she doesn't. There's this kind of delicate dance between the subtle and the unsubtle, and for me, the visual, and even you can even talk about the conceptual practice of having somebody take it all and carve into the museum wall, and we think about what the museum means and an institution means, and to just have a recently released prisoner take it all and carve words from a diary into a wall. Like even the conceptual practice of that still to this day gives me goosebumps. And that kind of like, and I'm sure that you'll be dealing with this in the months during this, with the show's open, because there are things which, you know, you come across in this exhibition which hit you like a hammer. And I think, you know, the institutions will be dealing with that in the next couple of months. But the question of, you know, of why, and so to deal with kind of the museum practice of, you know, kind of that mellow, just sitting back and looking, and then sitting back and then being like, you know, hit right along the head of, you know, this is happening and what's going on, and these are ideas which, you know, you may not be comfortable with. And that brings to me, you know, well, of course, well, what is the purpose of art if not to knock you upside the head sometimes, you know? And if you can't be knocked upside the head, then, you know, why are you in a museum? You know, why, if you can't be confronted with an idea that you're, you know, uncomfortable with, then, you know, what is the purpose of the institution? And I think that, you know, Tracey's work is why I've been waiting for, you know, over 2 decades for this exhibition, like I said when I first heard it was coming here. And yeah, these ideas are still resonate in a way that's like, you know, very palpable and powerful.
So I just want to move to the next slide because I think it speaks more to this relationship, you know, between you and Tracey in a very interesting way. Maybe, Christian, you could tell us more about how did this work come to be?
Well, until we had the kind of like Zoom rehearsal for this, up until then, Tracey and I have had very different ideas about how this came about, and I'll just tell my side of it. So my very first, after that dinner meeting, this is the result of my very first studio visit to Tracey. Tracey had an artist in residency in Cape Town, and so I arrived in Cape Town, and I arrived at the museum, which was a very metropolitan type encyclopedic museum. You know, it has, you know, beautiful moldings and everything all throughout the space, and I get to a velvet rope, and I was like, oh, Tracey's studio is right behind there, walled off room. So I, you know, proceed through the rope into this room, and there's this beautiful white room with nothing but a pillar in it. And I'm doing my New York critical thinking of like, oh, okay, we're talking about, you know, nothingness. Okay, yeah, no, I can do this. Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah, I'm ready for anything. And Tracey's there. She's like talking, and then I turn around, and she's already about like 2/3 of the way naked. And I'm like, oh, okay, yes, I'm a critic. I can, you know, yeah, I see what's happening. And she says, get naked. And kind of, you know, I think to myself, well, you know, when this is my, you know, what is it, second time in Cape Town, maybe my 6th time in Africa total, and I have somebody who's asking me to get naked in a studio visit. And, you know, you think, you know, well, that's just one of those moments in life where there's a before this happened and after this happened moment. And of course it's like, am I going to look back to the rest of my life and saying, no, I didn't get naked. So of course I got naked. And she jumps up, said, go sit over there. She jumps up on my lap and says, okay, now I just need you, you know, we're doing kind of like, it's kind of like a Rodin the Kiss kind of thing, but I'm going for, you know, you're the dealer, I'm the African-American, all these just words are being thrown at me, like, you know, in a flurry. And I said, so she jumps up in my lap, we get into position, and then she says, okay, we're ready. And then the photographer and a photographer's assistant come running out of God knows where, come right in front of us, take the picture, and she's like, oh, that was great. I'm just kind of like, you know, oh, okay. And she jumps down, and I don't know exactly what happened after that. But this image is the result, and you know, it spoke to so many things, and like I said earlier with the span 1 and span 2, you know, the relationship between, you know, the dealer and the artist, and the idea of an African and an African American, and you know what all of these things kind of mean, and what they are meant to say, but all within the context of, you know, Rodin's The Kiss, and kind of like, so all of these relationships kind of like mediated by that kind of like colonizing cultural overtones, you know, and so all of these relationships kind of like being extricated through this idea of art and love and beauty and all of these sorts of things, and kind of, you know, yeah, and I don't know, Tracey, would you?
Tracey, let's hear from you.
My version.
Yes, let's hear your version.
His version's way better. No, I spoke to him about it beforehand, and I was like, I need to do this work, and initially it was going to be donated to the city of Cape Town, and as live sculptures, a live sculpture donated to the city of Cape Town, opened by Patricia DeLille, who at the time was the mayor of Cape Town, and the other live sculpture donated to the city of New York, unveiled by Hillary Clinton. She was the governor of New York at the time. You were the senator, okay. And so, the pitch was like, African American conversation between, colored South African and African American, and the similarities and differences between that kind of experience. And the fact that, I'd grown up on an African American, obviously mediated, but we grew up on African American experiences in the sense that that was the space where that was so affirming, and
Even in the retelling of this,
yeah.
I still would have no idea that it was me in particular. Because I hear you saying all these things, I'm like, yeah, okay, and I can see myself then.
In the car.
Oh no, even then I could be like, oh, okay, yeah, I find all those ideas very interesting. But I still had no idea that it was me. Even in the retelling, all these years later. But go on.
Okay, you did say I didn't need to be naked. So maybe I didn't explain myself properly. Okay. But yeah, it was to highlight that, and have that conversation, because I felt like growing up in South Africa, like the people that we looked towards for empowerment, for thinking that we could fight this were Black American people, using their bodies against the state and against the system. And I think that, there were similarities also between how colored South Africans were also kind of placed, and even the term colored as a relationship to the African American experience in terms of categorization, and the relationship to slavery, and I said it initially was like one, and this is very crude, one was a psychological and geographical dislocation, and the other one was more of a psychological one. Kind of that sense of not belonging and still having to find your way. And also, so that's primarily what I wanted to do, was stimulate that conversation with this work.
But now, if you look at it and think about all the different elements that you've incorporated, I think the fact that you decided to use black and white photography is also quite specific in terms of highlighting the racial tensions within South Africa. And then, titling it The Kiss, again, there's this sort of art historical connection you're making there. And then the way it's formally constructed has another sort of reference to an art historical context. I'm just curious, were all these elements part of the thinking, or this was just a way in which, how you conceive your work? Because it seems like in a lot of your works, there are all these elements that seem that your conceptual framing is so deeply rooted within the artistic vocabulary or historical canon.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was when the photographs were taken, one was taken in the front and one was at the back, and I thought that it would be a double-sided. And I was still trying to figure out how I was going to present, I was like, okay, but it can't be live sculpture, it's going to be double-sided. And what happened, which is always kind of the case with, I think it's the kind of the fuck-up makes the art, because you're forced to think differently and figure it out. So my camera was a bit dysfunctional, so we were actually lucky to get, this was the only shot that came out. I think it was like a roll of 12. So, and it was so perfect. It was so perfect. And at one point I was like, ooh, and I think it was before Photoshop, or I was trying to figure out how I was going to fix the size of my butt, and I showed it to Emma Bedford, and she was screeching. She was like, oh my God, this is so lovely, so voluptuous. And I'm thinking really? But, it was also, that kind of, thinking that it would actually end up as something else, as sculptural, and then realizing actually, no, it's fine as it is. And it took me a really long time to, I mean, at this point, when I was working, I was like from kind of the conceptualization of the work to the execution of the work, was like 2 years of interrogation, So I've been thinking about this work for a really long time, and kind of trying to interrogate it from every angle, like, what if it looks this way, and then kind of, this sort of almost like relinquishing of power when the fuck up happens, which I think is also kind of something that I've had to do in Africa, when, I mean, this sounds like a terrible thing to say, but it's like the kind of cliche of kind of going to a space and then finding, I mean, when we did South meets West, which was the first time I was in this completely left the question, we went to Accra, and it was an exhibition with Southern African and Western African artists in Africa exhibiting. We'd all kind of met in other spaces before, but when we were showing, I think this was in 1998 or 1999, that's kind of when I kind of realized that at some point you kind of got to relinquish power and like, let the work be what it needs to be. Kind of like let it magically become itself, because we were showing in these spaces where like people didn't have electricity around us, and we had like some, like, South African artists with like 7 televisions, with 7 VCRs, like, and you've got like all this tech work. I mean, I had a video work, and I was like the stupidest thing to show there. And even in the visitor's diary, I mean, people were like, what is all this satanic crap? And, and people don't have electricity here, but you're using Satan, and it's just like, oh my God, like, and so, when you kind of like plan so efficiently or strategically, and when those plans disassemble, you've just got to like relinquish it, just your power, you're just going to say that this is what the work needs to be. And so that's kind of what happened with this. From all of that, like this years of just like trying to figure it out, and then it's just like it became what it wanted to,
So you talk about relinquishing power, which I understand. At the same time, your work is challenging power.
Yeah, but the work does what it needs to do, because it just uses me as a vehicle. That's what I also figured out. It's like you've got to be humble in front of the work. Like the minute you think that you're bigger than it, it's going to give you a bitch slap. You're going to get cut down. You're going to learn your fucking lesson. You're going to eat lots of humble pie. And I was like, okay, this is what it is. It's actually all about the work. And the gestures that happen, I mean, of course I have some agency. Of course, I'm not entirely possessed by the work, but it's like when like I said, when I get an idea to make the work. And was most especially during my suicidal phase. I was like, when I was up to the age of 33, when I was told like, yeah, you're gonna kill yourself, you're gonna come back, and it's gonna be much worse. And I was like, I don't want to come back to this fucking planet, so I'm gonna try to fix as much as I can while I'm here. And so, like, there's not gonna be another second coming, people. So anyway, so I was like, where was I going with that?
Well, you're just throwing some bombs here. Deconstruct.
It's going to go somewhere. We were talking about conceptualizing, and we were talking about the work and controlling the work and relinquishing, being humble before the work. Oh yes, and so every time I was trying to figure out how I was going to kill myself that morning, I'd get an idea for a new work, and this work would chase me until I created it. And that's the thing. It's like, and this is the whole thing. It's like, okay, so now, like, looking ahead, I'm like, my PhD is actually on this practice. It's like, we get callings in South Africa. You go to the mountain, you become a single, you initiate. And I feel this is what we do as artists. We neo-shamans. We've lost the training manual. So we kind of figure it out, and instead of kind of, absorbing everything that we do, and as empaths, not just as art makers, absorbing the energies of society and everything, whatever the fuck, all around us, and putting it into the work. We will hold it in ourselves, and yeah, that's another conversation.
Well, yeah, okay. So I'm curious now because, we're not going to spend too much time trying to trace your whole career, but I think that in these moments of defeat or in moments of vulnerability. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about, you know, how you choose what medium to work with, or how does the work manifest?
That's a nice conversation, because you know, initially the works are grand and expensive and amazing, and then they just get downsized because there's no budget. There's no budget. And then so one of the reasons I started doing performance was because it was the cheapest medium I could afford. You know, I mean, paint costs money, a studio costs money, like all of these spaces. And also I just found them like the most, you know, two-dimensional work, like really ineffective. Everybody loves a painting, but a painting doesn't really shift much. You know, it doesn't really shift sensibilities in the same way as that sort of the shock value of the naked form, you know. And the thing is, but one of the things I really miss just about art practice is the kind of the veneration of the naked form, you know, and not the objectification of once you start drawing and you start to sort of see the lines of a body, and it just becomes a shape. You know, it's not about gender, it's not about politics, it's not about any of those things. You know, and just kind of appreciating that, you know, and kind of going back to that. I mean, the first time I did naked life drawing, not using my body, obviously, you know, a model. I mean, it completely shattered my perception, just on so many levels, about so many things. And so, you know, just kind of the pleasure and the joy of just experiencing this body, you know, as suicidal as I've been. You know, it's like a phenomenal thing to have a body, you know, and celebrate it, you know. And anyway, the other thing is when the context would determine that. So, you know, it'd be like researching, you know, for example, you know, I didn't really do much research. I don't do that much research now, but in the past I used to. And this is like pre-internet. So it would be like going to the library and finding as much about, you know, the city, the country, and, you know, the people that are there, looking at, even just looking at the demographics, you know, and looking at as much as possible in order to find, like, the best way to speak to the audience, you know. And sometimes it failed, sometimes it didn't make any sense. Yeah, there's a whole rate, and then it would be like, what would be the most effective medium? And with video, there was the space to I mean, also because of its accessibility, but there was a place to play with color in the way that I couldn't just, you know, in a studio with a canvas, which I think I would have found incredibly frustrating, to just be in one sort of stagnant location. And, you know, what performance art has allowed me to do is also just travel the world, and, you know, and do these works, and thus also in the process kind of picking up on more kind of material to use for the work and for future.
Well, can we bring it back to just specifically Chabella? Can we talk about Chabella for a second? So this is Chabella behind us here in the video, and Raven will have some of the stills that were chosen very specifically to illuminate the characters. But this I felt was kind of a very breakthrough work because it provided this kind of foundation and sort of, you know, you look for, when you look at an artist, you know, the first thing that people kind of attune to is an artist's signature. And what is, you know, and I think that Chabella is kind of one of the very first Tracey Rose-ish kind of works that you could say that, you know, that Tracey went back to and continues to, like even San Pedro, which this exhibition I hope everybody gets a chance to round the corner there, and don't forget about San Pedro in the back, and then you can see how it relates to Chabella and so on and so forth. But I mean, it was in the Venice Biennale. This was in 2001, I think, right? Was it 2001? Yeah, the 2001 Venice Biennale, and Harold Zeman was the curator. And Harold Zeman comes up to me and says, "Oh, you know, I see how you choose your artists. You just choose your artists based on how beautiful they are." And he was the artist who I was working with, and that were Tracey and Paul Pfeiffer. And with Tracey's Chabella, it was kind of like the culmination of creating the characters and then how the characters interact with each other, and also, for me, most importantly, you know, what it did was it set up this kind of aqueduct between the local and the universal. And because there are things which are, you know, which Tracey has, you know, continuously shed light on over the years about what was, you know, things that are extremely localized and very kind of interpersonal humor, and then of course the kind of, the obvious Last Supper themes and things that are, much more universally themed throughout the work. And I think finding those iterations between, the very, local and the universal are things also that you can, continuously go back to with the Rose signature. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, were those intentional, were those just found, were those, like, how does that come about? And I think that this, let's lay it all on the table, Tracey.
Oh, okay. Don't have a convention. Well, I conceived Child Better at the same time, around about the same time as the Kiss, because I was on the residency program at Stanford National Gallery. And I was actually having dinner with Simon and Jami, and we were sitting in a restaurant just near the mountain, like with the mountain in the background, Table Mountain in the background. And so I showed him the sketch I was working on. I completed the sketch, and it was just a simple kind of drawing of the table with there were 13 characters that I'd sketched, and I was like, I got the invitation to Venice, and I want to do this piece, but I don't know how to do it, because it's going to take me at least 2 years to research and everything. And he said to me, well, why don't you just trust yourself? And I was like really shocked, because nobody ever told me that before. And up until that point, I was kind of working in quite a sort of minimalist sort of palette, so everything was in the kind of, black and white, gray range, and it was, there was conceptual and, obviously social political reasons for that besides, so I was, and then, I remember looking at the mountain and saying to the mountain, well, and it sounds really cheesy to say, but corny, but I was like, if my ancestors exist, I'm giving this over to you guys. Like, if this fucks up, then I know you don't fucking have, you don't fucking exist. If it does, then okay. And so I literally gave it over, and it was like magic how everything just made itself. And my mother was my costumist. Initially, was going to be a friend of mine, but she's going through a drug issue, was not very reliable. So I was like, okay, my mother came to the rescue, and like she was incredible. She finished all my sentences essentially. We shot it. We worked. I worked on the costumes for about 3 months, and then we did a 3-day shoot, and everything was shot on green screen. We kind of split up the most complex characters and kind of did whatever first. But and then having to find, like, in the process, it was kind of like working on the roof. So in the process, we were looking for a sound guy, and then Warwick Sony became available, and like and what was great was like finding the synergy with the people that kind of understood what it was that I wanted to do. So like, for example, with Love Me, Fuck Me, like the sound of Love Me, Fuck Me beating themselves, that is breakbeats. Chicholina's work was made of licorice, and that is a lightsaber from Star Wars. so there were all these like beautiful little quirks. And while I was working on it, I was kind of feeling like there were all these characters that just sort of started to emerge, and I wanted to find out more about them. And Christian was like, why don't you do like a photo series? And so that's when the photo series came afterwards. And I said that the photo series for me was like the intro to Dynasty, when they were all, they all stabbed their like character shots on the stairs. And the thing about Dynasty was that nobody wore the same outfit twice. And so I was looking for those outfits in every scene, series, and I was like, that's going to be the Dynasty moment for these characters. So it was like each one needed to be in an exact landscape that spoke exactly to who they were. Also just in terms of the layout, Lolita's Judas. St. Pedro's obviously St. Peter, but like just in terms of like the magical nature of how I was supposed to work was initially, what the two of them were supposed to be where they are right now, but there was a glitch because it was back then was like also it took like 4 days to render it, and it was a long weekend, and there happened to be a power outage in Cape Town back in like 2001, which is very rare. Back then, and now it's every day. But the guy didn't go back. The techie didn't go back to check. And so on the Monday when he came in, they still had a whole bunch because they are actually doing me a favor, and I completely took advantage of them. And they were working with advertisers. Anyway, so he was like, we can't do it here. We've got to shift these two characters around. And I was like, oh God, how am I going to fix this and like reconceptualize this or justify this, this change? And he was like, oh no, I'm sorry, we've got to flip it back. And I was like, yeah, the magic continues, Yeah.
Well, it's also quite interesting that I think there's a very, in terms of the costuming and the theatricalness of the work, there is this, this sort of almost like black humor, that's embodied in the work, and also, no, not at all. African American, and then at the same time, there's also this very, the materials you use, they seem to be this like everyday, sometimes kitschy, and playfulness. You're dealing with some very like hard-hitting content, yet you are using materials and positioning your characters in all these very sometimes humorous or playful interactions. I'm just kind of curious how you balance between the seriousness of the content and the intentionality behind the works, and with the lightness or the funny that is implied in the work.
I don't even know how the humor came about it. I think it was also a strategy. I think I just didn't want to be depressed anymore. I just kept looking at like all those apartheid shows with like really depressing work, like people who never suffer depression. I was just like, no, this is not the way we survive. It's like, like you find people in trauma always have like some of their sense of humor, and I'm not sure. I mean, I think it was a strategy for me to not just slit my wrist while I was making the work, But I don't even know how that even happened. Because the early work was, I think TKO was quite depressing. There was no humor in there. No, there was no. You think there is? What do you find so humorous about TKO? So TKO was this, maybe there's funny way to say. There were 4 spy cameras in a boxing bag in a structure that was supposed to be my homage to Monet's Water Lilies and Cubism. But also, I'd trained as a professional boxer for 4 years before I made the work, because I wanted to initially beat up a curator who was making a really bad apartheid exhibition. And then I was like, no, fuck, I really love boxing. And then the guy turned out to be a sweetheart, and I was like, okay, I'm not gonna fuck you up. And then I was training the one day, and I was hitting the bag. And the thing is, when you train, you come up with mantras in your head, and just kind of keep it going. And while I'm beating this bag, I surpass my pain point and my other, and then the next thing I know, I'm having this orgasm, and I'm like, what the fuck? And everybody else is in their zones. I'm like, oh my god, that's amazing. I'm gonna put that in my bag and I'm gonna use it for later. So when I decided, when I was working on the piece, when I was at Art Pace, and I decided that this was the work I was going to do. I mean, also again, I started running away from the work because I was just really afraid of it. And then 2 weeks before the opening of our works, I produced the piece. So I was beating the spy cameras till I had this orgasm, and I broke one of them. So it's supposed to be but yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's also just when you kind of get bullied a lot as a kid, it's you either become the class clown or you just get beaten up a lot. So maybe that's something in there, because the art was pretty harsh. You get beaten up a lot, so it's probably best to make people laugh. They like you. And then when you're telling them off and telling them they're pieces of shit, they don't feel it so much.
So maybe with that said, can you read that?
I asked her what would Penny say.
Penny's my sister.
Yeah, Penny's her sister, who I just met recently, a couple of years ago, and it just explained everything to me. In a way that I know Tracey now for decades, but Penny is 180 of Tracey. She's trim copper to a, like, you know, to a sharp edge. And just wound so tight and just so, you know, she comes across as like, she's a control freak. Control, like, just wound so tight. And so, okay, so, you know, after all these years to get into the gang, and so when you talk about being bullied by the art world, I was thinking, in that context, who was the bully?
The art world is Penny.
So that just jumped into the head. So yeah, so.
So I was gonna say, okay, so on this topic of bullying, because I think before we move on, I just want to hear a little bit more about the art world bullying, because I think your work, because of it seems to really rub a lot of people. Either they misunderstand the work, or they feel that it's too confrontational. And that, obviously, in terms of how the work has been received, there's
That
been...
means they understand the work. If that's the case, then they do understand the work.
Well, yeah. I was just trying to say that, yeah, with that, I mean, I think, how have you dealt with the reception of your work over these years?
Oh, well, the first time I had my solo was at the project in Harlem, and I hid in the back of the gallery. They couldn't find me. So, yeah, and then I don't know, I'm not really paying too much attention, I think. What do you want
Maybe
to say?
Christian can help us.
I just remember, you know, Jenny and myself just running around like, where is she? Where is she? And she was literally behind the wall of a video, you know, a video wall that we had, and she just spent the entire opening behind that wall. And Jenny was just like, you know, just get out there. You have to, you know, it's your opening. This is it. You have to be out there. And Tracey was just like, no, I'm not ready to come out yet. And Jenny just, you know, came around me and just like, kind of like, oh well, what do we do? And just in terms of, you know, the idea of the, you know, I think because of like the nature of a lot of the work, you know, if there were like, you know, production values to the extreme and so on and so forth, the work wouldn't be received the same way. I mean, there has to be a DIY element because it kind of like balances out the nature of the confrontation, you know, of the work. If the work were overproduced, it would be punching down, basically. It would come across that way, I think. And so the DIY kind of nature of the work kind of speaks a lot to, you know, like the struggle. You know, and it adds another element of the work that, you know, that people can either attach to or, you know, be, you know, and one of the things I love about her work is that it puts both the receiver and the critique of the work, it puts them in context, and there are very few artists who can do that, because when you're critiquing the work, you're saying a lot about yourself and what your stance is. And there's not a lot of work that does that, but that's a very important function of the work also, is that it puts the viewer in a context, and it makes you kind of make a choice as to where you stand, you know, in the art world and the work and so on and so forth. And so when you're talking about her work, you're inevitably talking about yourself and what your position is, both in the context of art world and just in life and so on and so forth, because that's what this work kind of forces you to do, which a lot of other works which are very kind of solemn in their context and like kind of just easily fit into a museum space or an art world doesn't make you, you know, take a stance. And, you know, that's one of the things I've always loved about her work also.
Yeah, I think also just fundamentally, I mean, I don't know if I believe it anymore, but I used to believe that art could change the world. So, you know, I mean, it's if you're going to have the space and the platform and, you know, to make the work, you've got to make that moment count, right? Like, you know, and absolutely every context is equally important. You know, there's no a museum space is as important as an independent space, you know. So, and when I'm talking independent space, it could be shop front, you know, it could be like a friend asking a favor, you know. And yeah, because I firmly believe, you know, the work chooses you, you know, and it chooses you to. And I've only kind of realized how true to a lot of people's practices. I think that is, at least the artists I hold in high regard. Like, you know, because you open yourself up for whatever it is that needs to be said. And you know, we stand in that space. We stand in a non-defined peripheral space. You know, sometimes we let in, sometimes we not. But you know, we have to push the boundaries. You know, that's part of the gig. Is like, when you do this, you've got to ensure that you don't leave that place the same way you found it. You know.
So when you push those boundaries, what is the artist's responsibility?
Just to make the work. You know, I'm not responsible. I used to think that we were responsible for people's reactions. You know, and then I realized actually, it's your shit, not mine. Somebody was like, you know, I'm so angry when I looked at your work. And I'm like, yeah, but it's not my fault, it's your issues. Like, why are we angry? Oh, because it made me think of, oh, there we go. Yeah, so, and I think that, you know, there was a point, like, also just in terms of the art historical narrative, that artists were expected, and I think maybe we still suffer the residue of that expectation, where we're supposed to make people feel better, or, you know, just, you know, not make them feel at all. You know.
No, absolutely. Visual art has kind of the beauty trap. It's kind of like that's all that visual art is you know, supposed to do and allowed to do, and especially in an institutional context. And it's like, you know, no, there's a, you know, like any other, you know, form of cultural praxis, visual art can access whatever it is that every other, you know, form of cultural communication can access. And you know, that's another thing I adore about you know, Tracey's work, is that it's not, you know, it can be beautiful, and yes, there's beauty within it. You know, I can take you through and point out the moments of beauty, but that's not all there is, and that's not all there should be, and that's not all visual art needs to be. And so, you know, and visual art kind of has to adjust people's expectations of that concept. I think, you know.
I think on that note, I would like to open it to the floor. If there's questions.
Thank you so much. Hi, Tracey. I have a question about just being back in New York at this particular moment and what that might mean for you. We spoke a little bit a couple of days ago, very briefly, about a performance at the Brooklyn Museum, the Kant Show, and I think kind of 2007 and 2023 and that gap in space. If you maybe have some reflections on that.
Sorry, it's a lot of questions.
Yeah, no, it's a big one. I'm trying to self-censor my response. Maybe. You know, what I love about New York is that it's like the last stop on like the freak show. You know, it's like everybody, you come here and you belong. It's like, and I was like just also analyzing it in the last 2 weeks. Like, I don't think there's anywhere in the world I feel this comfortable. Like, I feel like, I mean, besides crime and all of that stuff, you know, I'm talking about the sort of acceptance of conversations and having ideas that are respected, and you know, and I feel like it's probably just because of the sort of artistic sensibility that's here. I'm not using the right terminology or whatever, but it's just on a really kind of simple, in a sort of simple way that you know, this was also one of those like portals, you know, that like changed the rest of the world, you know, and I still feel like even though everybody says it's changed dramatically, I still feel like it has that energy. And you know, I mean, a part of my relationship to New York was Christian, you know, and the project. You know, I was in and out of New York and incredibly arrogant because I had the best gallerist in the world, and I could make the art I wanted, like fully support it, you know, without question, without saying. In fact, he would push me more than he'd tell me to stop. And so I've got this story about Christian, like this story, like this image I like to relay about it. It's like I said, Christian, what do you think? He'd be like, it's cool, like go further. And I'd be like, okay, Christian, is this cool? And you're like, go further. And I'm like, Christian, is this good? And he'd be like, go further. Christian, is this cool? Go further. And I was like, when the project shut down, nobody wanted to touch me with a barge pole. I was so far gone. Like but it was like just so incredible that like to have this person who was just 1 gazillion% committed to art and artists, like no fucking question, you know, and so, you know, to not have that here, but still, I mean, yeah, gives me my balls back, but yeah, you know, and I think that was the kind of like the seedbed for my relationship. You know, it's just like I just feel like to be the home of something that was so incredible, like the project. You know, it's always going to be that space.
You know, the first year of the gallery, the last show was Romeo Fazube, who we brought up, who's this artist from Benin, and the entire gallery during the opening was filled with people from Benin. And then, you know, at that moment I was just like, you know what, that's what I love about New York, is that you can do a show with anybody. And then all of a sudden this gallery in Harlem that nobody knows about will all of a sudden be filled with a community full of people that the work can address. And, you know, that sense of New York, you know, has changed. And I'm one of those people who are just like, you know, nah, it's not the same New York, and it's not, you know, and it's evolving, and, you know, yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't think it's the same, and I don't think it's going in a great direction, but, you know, these things take, you know, longer than, you know, than my vision can see as to where it will end up. But at the time, it was, you know, a particular time, a particular place, and the art world was a particular size, and a particular form, and a particular event, I think, which made all of these things possible. And there's a kind of, you know, there's something about a place and a time that you can take advantage of, and it doesn't, and the thing I liked also about a commercial gallery is that it's not institutional, and that you can just take advantage of a time and a place, and it can also stop. And, you know, so, and I wish there is a way you can institutionalize that kind of energy, but you can't. And, you know, I'm just happy that, you know, we have the time that we did. And, you know, it still feeds us both. So, yeah.
I was wondering, Tracey, if you could talk a little bit about how drawing plays a part in your practice and how it has.
Dory's my first love. So I think, you know, energetically, you know, it's unmediated. So you've got the drawing implement directly on the surface as opposed to painting and still mixing and kind of, you know, so I actually stopped drawing for a while because I started predicting people's deaths in the drawings, and I was completely freaked out. And I didn't know if I was causing the deaths or if I was just, you know, I only heard about channeling much later. So I was like, I literally stopped for a couple of years. You know, I think I didn't even know what it is, what's happened in the last few years. I think it was motherhood. After when I was pregnant, I think it was the only thing that was really safe to use in a sense. So, and I needed to make quite immediately, and so that started that relationship again. You know, and you know, and all the work started with the drawing. So you know, Chavela started with the sketch. Everything starts with the drawing, and I feel like that's the thing that's just like, you know, pull it out from the universe, and it comes through you, and it says, this is the gift. you know, and that's yeah. And then the other stuff is just fun. It's like a holiday, you know. It's like a drawing can just take you on holiday. It's like
They're like mapping stories, like they're not depicting images. The temporality. Oh.
Sorry, looking at that and looking at the drawings in the back room, I'm interested in how performative the drawings are. So they somehow relate to performance, and the temporality there's quite a lot of time in the drawings, right? Can you talk about the performativity of the drawings?
I never thought about it in that way. I just thought it was just the way of the nature of the room. When I was doing this one, I didn't have a lot of space as well, which is why there's the panels. So I was working on them in sections, you know what I realized, like doing all the painting for the installation components here, is that I'm actually a painter. I used to say I'm a frustrated painter. I'm not a performance, I'm a painter. Like everything is a painting. I was just like, oh my God, this is it. This is what it is. It's like even the drawings are that, you know, it's like, you know, and I mean, I don't even know, I mean, I know like a problem with saying that is that it just diminishes everything down into this one kind of thing. But I think painting is so powerful. I mean, at the moment I'm like tripping on the cave and how we were all doing our work in the cave with dancing and singing and painting on walls, and you know, there were no museums and no radio stations or record deals, whatever, but we were in theaters, but you know, why were we doing this? And I feel, you know, like going back to the cave is like such an important, like a reflective kind of process, you know, just like, that's what I want to know, that's what I want to understand, that's what I want to do, you know, and I think, I mean, the performance and the drawing, I mean, I can't say yes because I'm not thinking of performance, but I'm doing the drawing.
I can help you.
Oh, here we go, Koyo.
I'm Koyo. I just want to say something about when you're mentioning about when people were in the caves. I just read recently, someone said that, I like to say that we do art because we want to extend life, because art extends our lives, art extends our, you know, understanding of life. And someone said recently that we started doing art in the caves out of boredom. Because exactly, there were no radio, there were no TV, so out of boredom, people started making art. But I think that, of course, it's a pun and it's sarcastic. But I think that if you talk back to painting and to the caves, I think that we are completely, as you say, connected, reliant on living imprints in our lives, in what we do, in our surroundings, just in our existence. So it's imprinting, basically, which is, I think, it's part of what artists do, imprinting ourselves in life, imprinting ideas in the world, and painting is the basic form of imprinting.
Yeah, I suppose it solidifies the gesture, the performance gesture, the performative gesture.
Last question. Well, I have one. I think maybe the one thing that I also notice in your work is that, you know, that you use your body mostly as medium. I'm just kind of curious about, you know, to what extent that the body becomes a register for the many issues that you're trying to raise or confront, or how you actually think about the body, especially also in situations where it's not your body that's being used.
You know, I've been thinking lately, these works are, I mean, like, if you look at the Lucy's Flow series. I mean, it's like 2003, I think. 2000, like the early noughties, and I was like, wow, we've kind of also just come so far from the space. It's just like, you know, globally, it's a global community. I mean, you know, the use of the body is no longer like shock value in the same kind of way as it was back then. You know, we seem to make it African men walking out of the bush is not. I mean, they were kind of shocked when they saw it the other day. But I think that, you know, these aren't images that are kind of, you know, frightening, disarming, you know, challenging anymore. I think part of maybe what
Not in the world of city girls. Not in the world of city girls, no. It's this rap duo from Florida. I don't think the kids will be, you know, are as shockable as they were 20 years ago. It's basically what I'm saying.
Yeah. So I mean, for me as well, I feel like I'm kind of also over this phase of you know, of using my body or other bodies in this particular way. Not, you know, and not as a you know, it's not as a kind of sort of superficial kind of style, you know, development style, whatever, you know, like, I'm not talking, and just in terms of the effectiveness of whatever the message is, I don't feel is going to find itself in the physical form anymore, you know, in the human form anymore. Like, I'm not interested in that. So I'm actually more interested in film, and, you know, kind of doing something in a completely different environment that's not art-based. Because I mean, also there's just like, there's a lot of works that is just also around the body, and this kind of conversation around it is, I think, is a little bit 1990s maybe. You know, I think we should be kind of sort of pushing the parameters on what is acceptable, or, you know, within kind of normalized within society. And I think that a lot of the work of artists that also includes during the time, I mean, you know, from the last century, they influence, you know, the way that art trickles down into kind of mainstream society. I mean, I think that was more because of what was done in the last century. So now I'm like, okay, so how do I actually have an effect on, because I can see the effects of my work over the last 20 years, knowing now that, oh, okay, if I make a work now, I'll probably see the effect of that, you know, within, you know, the next 20 years. Unless I go into another kind of medium, which is what I love about film, is that, you know, it's a pop cultural device, you know. And I think, you know, when you were asking about the different mediums, I think it was more about also just the devices, you know, these mediums become devices, you know. The video is a device to, you know, in a particular context that works effectively. The body is a device that works in a particular context effectively, you know. So, I can't even remember what you asked. No, yeah, I mean, you were talking about the body, and you were saying, okay.
Yeah, no, And Tracey will be available for any more questions. No, but I say thank you, Queens Museum in particular, and thank you for personally and fulfilling a desire of mine that I've had for decades. And really, thank you so much. And I think, yeah, thank you, Tracey, of course. Thank you, Tumelo, for, you know, steering this conversation. But yeah, you know, my ultimate thanks are to Tracey and the Queens Museum. Really, thank you so much. And for you, I just want to try to absolutely. Thank you.